Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down-to-earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Welcome to Down the Garden Path, everyone. I'm very excited to talk to Bri Petersen with Urban Gardening Canada. Bri left her job in finance to chase her dreams as a gardener. She has been gardening for 9 years, with her gardening expanding every year as she falls deeper into her gardening obsession. She started UGC with a vision to provide accessible gardening advice to all Canadians, regardless of location, housing type, or budget. Food security and sustainability are two of the main pillars of UGC. Bri believes that gardening should be accessible to all. Welcome to the show, Bri.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Accessibility is huge, right? I think people think they can't grow food unless they have a big space.
Yeah, 100%.
And so what is your vision for UGC and how to make gardening and what's your impact or your goal to make gardening accessible for us Canadians?
So my first thing was building my website because I found that there was no Canadian information out there for growing advice. There are like a few Canadian originating websites, but they all have Fahrenheit still inside of their website. And I hate having to change over Fahrenheit to Celsius. And so my goal was to create a website where any Canadian could go onto it and actually find the information that was in Celsius and was related to our shorter growing seasons. So my goal is to make sure that even if you live in a zone 3 somewhere in Canada, that you can still get information in order to grow food and be able to feed yourself.
Excellent. Well, that is good. And our products are, I think Canada is unique about what's available to us, and the ranging climate here is different than other places in the world, right? And in
Yeah,
North America.
yeah, 100%. We definitely don't have quite the same breadth of products that the US has.
That's right. That's right. So, but they're coming along. Like I think some of the stuff, the advantages I think of our herbicide and pesticide ban, as challenging as it might be, I think it's good for us and good for our health, right? In the long run.
Yeah, I think too that Ontario is a lot more strict on our
Hmm.
chemicals than a lot of the other provinces are. And sometimes I forget that all of our provinces are so different, but that we do specifically have a lot more restrictions here in Ontario for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. So your approach to helping people you created a course.
Yes, yeah. So I have the website that offers free information. I have YouTube that offers free information, and I actually have quite a few free ebooks. And then the course is now in addition to all of the other free information that I have. And this is more directed towards gardening in a changing climate, so more the climate crisis version of how you can strengthen your garden.
Hmm. What's your biggest concern with the climate and how you see that it's over the past year gardening experience, how it's changed?
Oh, a lot of different things. So I think like specifically from the garden's perspective is that it's just confusing. Like when do you plant out anything anymore? Because I've had enough years now where you follow along with either your last frost date or the Victoria Day weekend where, the old wives' tale of waiting till May long weekend. And then you'll get 2 degrees and like whipping winds that just tear apart all of your plants. And so that part has gotten really confusing. And then also, it depends. Like when I lived in the Toronto area, we had droughts all summer long. And then here in Ottawa, we're the opposite. It literally never stops raining here. And so,
Oh,
yeah, it's wild. It does not stop raining here. And which you can see in our winters, we get like 6 to 10 feet of snow every year, I swear. And so it's just like having to get used to building a garden that either had to survive a drought all summer long or now it's just raining constantly and your plants just deal with all of what's coming here.
yeah, yeah. Because yeah, it's always finding the sweet spot, right? Too much heat or too much water is not a good thing.
Yeah, and so it's like, and then Two, you're like, well, is next year going to be different? Like, I don't know. And so you can read a long range forecast, but you don't really know if the next year is going to, like, do I prepare for a ton of rain this coming season and put every plant in a terracotta pot so it dries out quickly? Or are we going to get a drought and I'm going to end up with every single plant drying out and then I'm out there twice a day watering my plants? Like, it's a
Mm-hmm.
gamble every year.
Yeah. Now, do you garden? So tell me a little bit about your garden. Do you garden in containers only, or do you have a in the ground?
So originally, when I moved here, I have maybe five raised beds. They're pretty small though. I only have about 100 square feet of gardening. I don't have a lot of space here. And then if I planted too many seeds and I refuse to throw them out, then I have pots literally everywhere filled with plants. And then in I think July of last year or June of last year, I finally got access to a city-run allotment here. So now I
Oh,
have
wonderful.
yeah, I have an allotment now. So this will be my first full year growing there. And it's like including walkways and whatever the full square plot is 25 feet by 50 feet. So it's
So
quite large.
yeah, that's going to be good. So how's your seed starting going?
Oh, this year I'm actually doing a good job.
Good.
I find seed starting is very much like how your mental health is doing. So if I'm having a bad mental health year where the weather has just been really bad, then my seeds take a beating and I don't do very good of a job of taking care of them. But this year I'm motivated with my allotment. So
Oh, that's good. Well, they take up a lot of space in the house, right, to get going. So,
yeah, they take up space, they take up time, they take up money.
oh, of course,
There's a lot with them, but if you don't pot them up fast enough, then all weeks of work goes to waste, and
for
then
sure, for
it
sure.
just snowball affects how you're feeling.
Yeah. And now that you have the allotment, you probably can plant some things that will take more space, right? That you couldn't do in your own garden.
Yeah, I'm growing artichokes this year for the first
Ooh,
time, and I hear they take up a lot of space. So
really? I hadn't heard that. But are they not aground?
no, it's the flower stalk, and so if an artichoke is this big, then the plant has to match with it, and you can get like six or seven
Oh,
artichokes on a plant.
okay. Kind of like broccoli, right? Or
Yeah,
Brussels sprouts.
yes,
I think
Brussels
of
sprouts
Brussels
is
sprouts.
also a big space hog too.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Oh, very interesting.
yeah.
And the timing of, so half the battle I find with seed starting is not starting too soon. So even in Ottawa versus here in Pickering, you're slightly different dates, right? Of when you start. Because if you get too ahead of yourself, then you're trying to keep these little seedling fragile plants. And we've all done it, right?
I'm still so I moved here. I think this will be my second year seed starting here, and I
Okay.
haven't moved off of the Toronto timeline. I'm still on,
Oh,
I
okay.
can't like break out of it. And I'm like, oh, the snow will melt here. The snow will melt here. It's fine. It, it never does. We have so much more snow than Toronto does. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have a couple of my covers on, like some cold frames and whatnot, in hopes that I can get out my items outside, but we still probably have like 2, 3 feet of snow here. So,
Ah, okay. Well, we did get a lot of snow this year here,
yeah.
but we never know what we're going to get. So yeah, so I think even here we're a bit delayed as far. I was shocked yesterday. We did have like from when I left the house to when I got back, I was like, oh, it really did melt, but there's still quite a bit like where the higher
Will melt
areas and
from,
stuff.
yeah.
But we don't know. I mean, even as a landscape designer, I know people will say, "Well, when are you starting? Like when do you start? When do you start installing, or when do you start?" And it's like we don't know. We don't know what the
Yeah.
weather's. Like we could say, April 1st, but it could rain for 3 weeks. We could say May 1st, it could still rain for 3 weeks. So or it's going to be. We've had a few years where it's been really dry in March, and they've started you can start little things in March because there still is road restrictions. None of the big trucks can be on the road
Mhm.
until that date always stays firm. People don't know that, but like
Yeah, I didn't know that.
yeah, there's road restrictions of when the guys can start with their trucks and trailers. Um, and so that determines if sometimes it may seem like an early spring, but they can't quite get going yet. But yeah, so weather really is our biggest challenge, isn't it?
100%, yeah.
Um, and I know from my landscape design and home gardening, residential, more ornamental gardens, I know that the summers are warmer. Our winters aren't, aside from this year. And I know things that when I started, 18 years ago, were not necessarily hardy, and now they are. Right there. I mean, I think of Japanese bloodgrass as one perennial, which was, people loved it in the garden with the little red tips and stuff. But whether it survived the winter was like hit or miss. And now it's almost borderline invasive. Like it really, and not only does it winter, but it spreads,
Oh,
right? More than,
really?
yeah. So I wonder if, have you noticed things from that standpoint of plants that were, you kind of had to baby them initially, and then as even though we have the fluctuation, like, but now they're more successful or more resilient, do you think?
So for me, I struggle a little bit just from moving from a zone 6 to a zone
Mm,
5. So
okay.
I'm still
Or
functioning in
other way around.
no, so Ottawa's a zone 5 and Burlington was a zone
Oh,
6.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I actually moved to a colder one, so I'm struggling because I'm still planting zone 6 items here. And then they die. But yeah, I find it interesting because the greenhouses sell things to you here in Ottawa, like for example, butterfly bush isn't actually hardy to zone 5 unless you wrap it up like a big baby in the winter time.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah. And so, but they'll sell it to you and it's like $30, $40 for, a plant. And so we bought some and then they died the first year and we were like, well, what the heck? And then we found out they weren't hardy to zone 5. And so now I wrap mine up. I have one left that's still alive. So I wrap it up every single year. And so
Hmm.
I don't really notice too much just because I moved to a colder zone. So but I mean, my pepper plants did amazing last year, even with all the rain and stuff, because it's especially Ottawa without the Great Lakes being here, it gets so hot here in the summertime and we have no
Oh,
wind, like none of the lake effect wind here. And so it can be like 40, 45 degrees with stale air. And so my peppers do really good here because of that.
oh, that's
But
good to know.
it's too hot to be outside.
Yeah, really. And you would see people wouldn't think of that in Ottawa, would they?
Oh, it's just like I miss Lake Ontario's like cool breeze that comes with it because it's
Hmm.
just so hot here.
Okay. And how about tomatoes, which don't necessarily like it as hot as peppers?
Yeah, I actually don't haven't gotten any blight here. So I
Oh.
don't know if it's also maybe less humidity is helping keep the blight down, even though we've gotten a ton of rain. So I guess my soil thankfully isn't carrying any blight in it. But yeah, my tomatoes do good and actually survive a lot longer than they did when I lived in the Toronto area.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So regarding the course, so what made you decide to write a course?
So originally I did this as a live presentation. So this is actually a big part of why I started Urban Gardening Canada was because I'm a climate activist and I've been really stressed out about the climate crisis for a long time now. And so I wanted partially to do the gardening business for Canadians, but also because I felt like if I wanted to get the average person to care about the climate crisis, then I want to bring it to their doorstep through gardening. And as gardeners, we're always watching the weather and documenting things. And so the more you get into gardening, the more you realize that things aren't the way they used to be. And so then you start to become concerned about the climate crisis. And so I mixed the two together and started doing presentations on how to garden in the face of climate change. And then I was being hired quite often by different horticultural societies. So I could see that there was a demand there for it.
Mm.
And so I thought, if I can only tour around the Ottawa area giving out this presentation, then I may as well create a course for it so I can give access to all Canadians plus anyone else around the world.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, horticultural and garden clubs are great ways to kind of get the pulse, right, of what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm limited because they don't do a lot of Zoom meetings or any type of those things unless it's like the dead of winter. And so I'm limited in where I can drive in order to do these
Ah,
presentations. And so I figured I could give it out through a course.
yeah, that's good. Well, I mean, the GTA is still, and my Pickering Garden Club in the winter do still do Zoom
Oh,
because we
okay.
found that we through COVID when everybody went to Zoom, we still had great attendance, and we when we remember back to pre-COVID, often we'd have like these great speakers for January, February, and March, but there'd be like a threat of an ice storm or a little bit of snow or a bit of freezing rain and nobody would show up.
Yeah.
So we kind of thought, you know what, let's just take that pressure off we can still have a meeting on Zoom, and then we can get speakers from farther away. So I will I'll let the lady know that, because I think that would be great, and I know many of the other clubs are doing the same. So so yeah,
Mhm.
so you might be able to branch back to the GTA a little bit with your knowledge.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So when you were, let's say with the horticultural societies, what were the biggest questions you found, or some things that did you see a reoccurring theme?
Um, Not really. I cover the entire like gardening season, quite
Hmm.
literally from like setting up your garden through to like seed saving in order to set your garden up for the next year. And so a lot of stuff is just new information. Like for example, I talk a lot about peat and removing peat from your garden because of
Hmm.
the carbon impact from digging up peat bogs. And so I do get a lot of questions related to that because in the UK, it's very well talked about at this point about
Yeah.
removing peat from garden soils. But here in Canada, it's not talked about a lot because we are one of the top extractors of peat in the entire world. So,
Hmm.
of course, Canada is not going to talk about our own industries that provide a lot of jobs. And so I bring that one up. And so that's a lot of times is new information to people.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it was such for older gardeners, a little bit older than you and I, um, it was a staple, right? Like, and it um yeah, so I think it informing them that why, because there is a why, it's not just stop putting eggshells in you know what I mean? There's a why
Yeah.
to that has a bigger impact. So that's good. And have you found like people have been understanding like, oh my goodness, we weren't aware?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people
Hmm.
are just didn't know about it, or I was at an event last year and made peat-free soil that I went to the same event this year where I had sold it and didn't make it this year. And I had people come up and ask me if I was selling it. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but here's an article on my website where you can learn how to make your own peat-free seed
Oh,
starting
that's
soil.
good. Oh,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
So, well, that is really really good. And so, do you find when you're talking the course or when you're talking in soil is a big part of, right? That's the foundation of what we plant in. Is that do you kind of start there and kind of, it's in addition to the peat, there's other things in addition to try not to use peat.
Yeah, so it's obviously building up healthy soil because healthy
Mhm.
soil stores carbon. And so the more you focus on your soil, A, you're storing carbon, but B, you're also like creating really healthy plants for yourself. And the healthy soil is going to fight your pathogens like blight, and it's going to keep a good balance of your insects while also growing healthy plants. And so soil is easily one of it's taken for granted, I think, for a lot of gardeners, where you either top it up in the springtime and then never think about it again. But really, there's so many different things that you can do to keep your soil healthy, like not pulling plants up by the roots, like cutting them at the base to help keep all of the bacteria happy inside the soil. So there's just a lot of different things that are actually activities to keep your soil healthy that is fighting the climate change at the same time.
Really? Yeah, I never thought of that. So just
Yeah.
cutting,
Yeah. So
yeah,
you
so
just cut your
leaving the
plants down
roots
at
to, yeah, to decompose kind of thing to feed the
yeah.
soil.
And then your new plants, a lot of times, can use the original root pathways from the previous plants to help grow stronger roots.
Wow, that's interesting because I know in, again, the ornamental side of things, we try to get people to stop the whole like put the garden to bed and clean it all up. And so that's kind of the similar, but yet I feel like people on the vegetable side feel like, oh, they really need to clean it up, right?
Yeah. Well, so I even had celery left over in my garden. I don't clean up any of my gardens. I have like some pepper stumps in one of my gardens from just chopping them down. And a lot of times I chop and drop where I just leave it to decompose on the top of the soil like a mulch. And then I left celery in the garden and I have like raccoons and squirrels coming and chewing on it now in the springtime. So it's like, and like for me, I'm never gonna kick out an animal from my garden. It's just not gonna happen. And so I like that they come in and they have their little dirty paw prints coming up to the celery and they're eating it.
That is so funny. Now, how does that work with, because I know we should be moving our plants, like you're not going to grow celery in that same spot this year, right? So does that,
I
or,
actually don't crop rotate. I
oh,
personally
okay,
don't.
okay,
There's a couple reasons. The first is being that my gardens are just too small to do
okay.
it. And so like I'll focus on uh, feeding the soil with natural fertilizers. I grow comfrey, a sterile version of comfrey because comfrey can be very
Invasive.
invasive if you grow the common variety, which bothers me that you can buy common comfrey seeds on the market. It's very upsetting for me.
Oh, I
But
didn't know you could get sterile seeds.
yeah, but it requires cutting. So the thing with comfrey is it's still going to go, 10 feet down. So once you plant it, it's permanent, but it's sterile. So the flowers don't produce seeds. And so
Okay.
wherever you plant it, it stays where it is and it's not going to spread. And so as long as you like buy it from someone else. So I grow the sterile version. And so I use the comfrey for mulch and for feeding my soil and comfrey tea and all that stuff. So I focus more on making sure that my garden is topped up with quality soil and I'm feeding it throughout the season versus crop rotation.
Okay. And how does the comfrey feed the soil?
So originally, I had read it was a biodynamic accumulator, but now there's potential it might not be. But the theory is that the roots grow so deep into the ground that they're accessing nutrients that no other plants can grow. So similar to like how dandelions have a really deep taproot, they're getting access to other nutrients. And so it accumulates into the leaves, and it's supposed to be like equal in the NPK to a lot of other manures and other
Hmm.
fertilizers. And so there's like you can make comfrey tea where you just let it rot in a bucket of water, or you can just cut it up and it breaks down within like a week. The leaves will just turn into like powder within a week, and so it just helps feed the soil.
Okay, so you're taking the leaves off of the plant and spreading it across the soil. I've
Yeah.
never heard that before, so that is really interesting.
In all fairness, I learned it from Gardener's World and Monty Don,
Oh, okay.
which
Perfect.
is
Yeah,
where I get a
don't you?
lot of my knowledge from.
Oh my gosh, don't you love Monty Don? I don't, there's not enough. The problem is there's not enough hours in the day, right?
Yeah. He
To-
doesn't know that he's my uncle.
Oh yeah, his approach to things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean I focus on the design side with some of the stuff he's done, but
Yeah.
yeah, just not enough time.
Yeah.
The off season is not long enough,
I know. Yeah.
to take
Yeah.
in all of the Monty Don. But that is interesting. There are many different recipes out there, I know, to make like a compost tea type situation, that type of thing. Is there anything else that you've looked into, like mycorrhizas or any other things that you've kind of tried to see, like on this side of the garden, test out like this side of the garden or this side of the garden to see if there's any benefits one way
In
or
all
another?
fairness, I don't do any long-term tests because I just don't have the capacity and I
Yeah,
know I will fail at it. I commend so many people who can, YouTube videos where they're like, we tested this from June to August and here's the results. And I'm like, I wish I could do that.
yeah.
But unfortunately, I just don't have, I'll fail and make a mistake and not document it properly. So.
But anything you've kind of just noticed, like maybe not as an official study, but well, obviously you've noticed an improvement with comfrey.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the like bigger things for me that what I've done because in Burlington, my garden wasn't as good as it is here, which so that in itself just became its own experiment. And so there's like a couple things is that in Burlington, I didn't really take care of my soil properly there because I square foot garden. And so it's really intense on the nutrients in the soil because you're packing so many plants into a small
Hmm.
space. And so not recognizing just how hard it was on the soil to be planting, 9 Swiss chard into 1 square foot is a lot of nutrients that are going out of it. And then the other thing was just realizing like how much this sounds goofy, but just how much the sun really matters. And so I had quite a few large maples in my backyard in Burlington
Mm.
that just shaded it more than I ever thought they actually did versus now that I've moved here in Ottawa, I have there's no trees in our backyards because of like the way where our neighborhood is. And so I have like full sun all the time, and you can just totally see the difference between the plants.
Yeah, yeah, it is true. Although some things, like, have you found sometimes, because I found my full sun, availability, my tomatoes don't ever have never really done that great.
Oh yeah.
My cherry the grape and cherry tomatoes have done okay, but it's been very hit or miss. And I primarily I've tried them in the garden. I also don't have a very big garden, but I do containers as well. I've heard that they could do with a little bit of, because our summers are hot and humid, that afternoon, like a bit of afternoon shade, can benefit them. And
Tomatoes are
so it's hard,
fun.
right?
Yeah, tomatoes are funny because I call them zombie plants because they're impossible to kill. But then at the same time, they're like Goldilocks plants because once it reaches over something like 28 degrees Celsius, they stop ripening their tomatoes because they don't like the heat. So they're very specific. They want it to be 20 degrees in order to be growing happily. But if it hits over 28, then they're like, well, we're not ripening these tomatoes for you. And so they're very specific on how they like to grow their fruit. And so I do think that giving them shade at peak sunlight or peak heat is
Yeah.
always helpful for them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I like that Goldilocks.
Yeah.
Uh, so back to the course. So tell me who would be your target market for this course? So just so our listeners know that, yes.
So for me, I would qualify it as someone who's been gardening for anywhere from like 3 to 8 years.
Okay.
So once you hit the 10-year mark, you know quite a lot of stuff. And so, and I would say the first like 3 years of gardening, you don't want to overwhelm yourself with information because then you're going to feel like it's too much and that it's not for you and that you'll never remember all this stuff. For me, I find the first 3 years, 3 to 5 years of gardening is all about failing. Everything you do is just testing what works for you, what you like to grow,
Mhm.
failing at things, learning some things. And that's really those first 3 years just fly by. You start with, a couple pots, and then all of a sudden you've got a garden, and then you progress from there. And so I would say it's for that like late beginner to an intermediate gardener is really who it's for because it gives you everything you need to know from the minute you start your garden till the day, like the moment you're harvesting from it. And so it's like full of so much information that it's meant to not overwhelm a beginner, but add on to what you know as that like beginner to intermediate gardener.
Okay. And does it start with seed starting?
Yes,
It
it
does. Okay. So it's important for our listeners now, right? It's pertinent.
does.
Our timing is good.
Yeah, so because it covers the whole cycle, like even if you pick it up in July, for example, you're still going to get information that's going to take you through to closing down your garden, and then you can
Mm,
pick it back up again in the springtime because you
okay.
get lifetime access to the course.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. And excellent. And so anything else that people need to know that you want people to know about the course? Like how
Yeah,
long would
so
it that like take? And yeah.
Yeah, so it's a self-paced course, so it really just depends on how long you want to take with it. And so it's a multimedia, so there's videos in there, but most of it is written just so that way you can take your time and read it through and comprehend it. And then there's checklists and workbooks and all these different add-ons that belong with it. And so if you wanted to just read it and not comprehend all of it, it'll take you a few hours. But with the workbooks and the checklists involved, it should take you a lot longer. But if you're actually slow and methodical in processing it, it's gonna take you like probably 8 hours at least.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not too much, but it's worthwhile. Like it's in depth enough too, right?
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
and for me personally, I theory is like interesting, but I'm more action based. And so I built my course based off that. Like you can tell me theory until you're blue in the face, and I'm going to be like, yeah, so what? Like, what are you
Hmm.
trying to get at? And so that's kind of how I function. And so I give you theory and information that is new to you, but then I actually give like actionable items. So there's, I think 101 actionable items in this
Oh,
course. And so they're
okay.
very specific, like go out and do this, or get this, or look at this, or replace this. Like it's very, very specific. And so the checklists are are an accumulation of all of those. So that way, if you breeze through it and you're like, okay, whatever, it's an accumulation of all 101 items for you to actually slow down and be like, well, do I actually do this? And can
Hmm.
I implement this? And so it's just meant to give you the opportunity to read it, understand the theory, and then properly implement it.
Okay. And you've considered, because it's Canadian, and I know, may have American listeners or listeners from around the world, but Canada's a big country, right? So like Nova Scotia gardeners versus British Columbia gardeners, have you kind of tailored it so it's transferable, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, so I actually had my course tested globally. So
Oh.
Yeah, so I've had people from the east coast of Canada all the way to the west coast test it. I've had someone from Phoenix, Arizona test it to make sure that it works in the more desert-like areas of America. Someone from the Netherlands has tested it, and I've had someone from New Zealand test it.
Wonderful. Well, that
Yeah.
is wonderful.
Yeah,
And you got good feedback, or did you have to like tweak things after you got the feedback?
yeah, so the person who tested it from Arizona, I had a little bit of more information to add from them because of course we don't have any desert here in
No.
Canada. So the idea of the proper drought, I had some information to include from there, but it was really good feedback that I got. So to know that it applies in New Zealand is really great. And then the person who tested it from the Netherlands, they have I think that that Europe is a lot more dialed into the whole climate change and climate crisis. So it was really good getting her feedback from the Netherlands and her perspective of a country that doesn't deny climate change and really like leans into it. So that was really great.
Excellent, excellent. What did you learn from her as far as leaning into climate change? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was just like she really pulled in a lot of the gardeners pulled out like specific gardening advice, but she was able to really pull out that there was like climate action involved with it. And so for me, it was really important that she recognized that it wasn't just like do this in your garden, but how it tied back to climate change.
Ah, excellent. Like the peat example, right? Of why,
Yeah.
there's a reason not to use it, and this is why. It's a bigger world issue versus,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, we don't want you using it in the garden, right? Because and when people use like they think they're using a bag of it, but still it's got a greater issue, right? And if everybody stopped using the bag,
Like I can only imagine if on soil bags that they put the emissions that existed on it. Like you're buying
mm,
just a bag of peat moss and it tells you just how much carbon was released when they dug it up. And peat bogs release carbon for 40 years after extraction. So it's like if they did the full life cycle of how much carbon came out for that one bag of peat, I wonder how people would react to it.
yeah. And I do want to let our listeners know to check the bags. Like if you are not making your own soil, but you're going to a big box store or garden center, like literally, I don't know that people think to like read the ingredients. And that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's so many things with bagged soil that you don't think about from the fact that there could be pesticides in it. So if they dug it up in a place that was treated with pesticides, like that can translate to your seedlings or to your garden. And if you grow organically, the worst part is that organic soil bagged is so much more expensive than the non-organic, and that's frustrating, but you are transferring any type of applied like chemicals into your own garden. But
Hmm.
two, peat has never been an issue in Canada. And so why would you ever even think to read the ingredients and be like, oh, there's peat in here? Plus, oh, I would say almost like 90% of bags have peat in them. So it's almost impossible to avoid it.
Yeah, yeah. It is. I did watch a video of somebody else who was doing that at a big box store, and she did find, but it was, of course, more expensive. But there's other things like that are in there that don't need to be in there, right? And other companies that we won't name here that you should avoid. That their focus is as fertilizer. Your soil, as much as we want the soil to be good and beneficial to our plants, I don't believe, and see if I'm sure you agree with me, the soil doesn't need to come like with fertilizer in it already, right?
No, no. And the creation and application of synthetic fertilizers is so bad on our planet.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that is the biggest, I think one of the biggest things is there's really no need. And again, it's like peat. It's been around so long that people don't realize the damage, but there's synthetic fertilizers are not what the plants need.
Yeah, and then I was just watching a video on YouTube where they were showing that they have way more aphid pressure when using synthetic fertilizers in comparison to organic or no fertilizers because they like
Really?
that really fast growing. When you have high nitrogen, you get fast growing leaves and they're tender, and so the aphids love it, and so you get way more aphid pressure, which was new to me.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then that becomes, then you have to introduce something else to take care of the aphids. It really goes down a slippery slope. So, yeah. So I do want to recommend to all of our listeners, don't you agree, that really look, and yes, you may have to spend more money on an organic soil, um, but it's worth it in the end. Or creating your own. Is it? I've never kind of created my own, and I'm guilty of also buying like sending my son, can you get me 10 bags of garden soil? Like I'm, because it's fine to say to sit here in March and say, yes, let's do it all. But then when you're like frantically trying to get things in the ground and the seasons, you make mistakes and you just do what's ever easier, right?
Yeah.
So making our own soil, is that?
Well, composting is a great way to do it. So if
Hmm.
you have an outdoor composter, which I'm hoping to make one this year because every year I'm like, can I make a compost bin yet? Like my partner just won't let me. And so I'm
Oh,
like, this year's my year. I'm making a compost bin. But we also have like a worm composter in our house. So worm
okay.
composting. And so that's really good for your kitchen scraps. And
Hmm.
then so it creates the worm castings that I've been using in all of my seedlings. And I put it in some of my houseplants too. So I use that for the kitchen scraps. And then I'm hoping to get an outdoor composter because then all of your yard cleanup can go straight into the compost bin.
Yes, yes. I rescued from the garbage. I had a neighbor actually putting one out. The one that is spins, so
Yeah,
yes, so that one. Because I felt like it's compactable and portable, like we could move it. Because I
yeah,
don't, we have a pool in our backyard that takes up most of the yard. So I rescued it from him throwing it away, and I've been using that. And I actually just topped. Well, then it got froze. So this is my first year really using it, so it really freezes. So it was hard to do the turning this season, but I was out there yesterday and added some more to it, and can see what's happening. And I liked that it is all contained. Because I don't want to attract anything either, right? Which is a balance of what you put in it. And I think that's something that makes people a little bit afraid of composting, right?
yeah.
Is the potential for critters. And my husband, who is an avid gadget man, with everything, bought a Lomi. So
Oh,
we
yeah.
have a Lomi that also takes. So I now we're fighting because even he said to me yesterday, he goes, "Did you take Lomi's food and put it outside?" I'm like, "Yes, I did. I did." Um, so yeah, so now we're fighting for where's the compost going to go. But it is kind of fascinating how that thing breaks it down into this. So then I'm trying to figure out places to dump it in my like ornamental garden. But yeah, I need to start putting it in my vegetable garden too. So there's ways to do it, everybody. There is, things that you can invest in, like you said, a composter. If you are short on space, or let's say you're an apartment dweller, like something like the Lomi, I know they seem kind of cost prohibitive. But again, I think over time, right? Do you think people know what Lomi is?
Uh, Maybe, but just quickly, you can put a worm compost bin in your apartment too.
Excellent. Well, that's good too. Yes, that
They
is
don't
also.
smell, so
Yes, they don't smell, and they can be. I have a good friend and client who had, and it was like they make them cute and adorable. It looks like a little table that came from IKEA, right? She had it in her office, and it was just like, I'm like, what?
yeah, mine's
Yeah.
very like attractive looking too, I would call it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a good option. So Lomi is just so my husband was able to get like one of those open box,
Oh,
somebody
nice.
type
That's a
of
good,
things.
yeah.
So yeah, so we got it a little cheaper because I was like, what are you doing? But the amount that it creates, and it does, but the thing is, it does take a long time. That thing works hard.
Usually like overnight, yeah, do you run yours
More,
overnight?
I would say 12 to 14 hours,
Yeah,
to do that and stuff. So we eat well, I think, and so yeah, kitchen scraps can be a lot.
yeah.
And we were just tired of the one that's sending it all to the curb and you know the
Does Pickering
garage.
give it back to you though?
They do. You can purchase, or I think they do sell it as free
They
compost.
sell it?
I I I don't know. I don't
Okay.
don't quote me on that. But I still worry about that, like how pure that is, or whether things like dog strangling vine seeds are getting into that too. Like,
Um,
are they able to separate? Like, I don't know. I've always tried to figure out how I could talk to somebody about that, to be honest, on that compost. So,
well, because Hamilton gives theirs away for free. They
okay.
used to do it twice a year. I'm not sure post-COVID if they only do it in the spring now. And then Burlington was also doing it. Plus, they had a service road where you could pick it up all season long as it was available. And I
Okay.
think Durham might do it too. But here in Ottawa, ours is an industrial compost. So like you could put cat and dog poop into it, but it's full of bacteria, but they're an industrial composter, so it's allowed. But they give theirs away to farmers, so it doesn't come back to the city. But I know a lot of the GTA cities give it back, and it is so much fun going to these compost giveaways. It's just like this big pile of black steaming soil. But the only issue that I've found is that there's plastic in it because people put the stickers or like where they put the wax thing on the top of the banana bunches, like that type of stuff will show up in there. But
Hmm.
I've I've never had weeds show up in my gardens when I
Oh,
used it
good.
every single year in Hamilton and Burlington while I lived
Okay.
there. I never had any weird weeds show up. I never had stinging nettle until I started buying from landscapers. I didn't even have stinging nettle show up in my compost.
Okay.
Um,
That's good to know because I
but
was always
I,
nervous about whether they did get it hot enough. But and I think they do give it away. We do have free giveaways because there's always for the garden club. There's always a, like, do we do our garden sale the same day as the compost giveaway and stuff like that. So yes.
But I would say that my garden never thrived when I topped it up with the city's compost. Like I never
Mm,
found, like I always like envision compost as like, your plants are going to be glorious and huge and green. And I never found my plants did that, even though I topped up every single year with the city's compost. So um, like obviously I've never tested the nutrients in it, so this is
mhm.
all just conspiracy theory, but I do think that mixing the city's compost with like some kind of higher nutrient might be more helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any other secret thing that you like to add to your soil?
I honestly think that comfrey is probably my biggest secret. And we have a ton of rabbits here, so they secretly fertilize my garden, secretly, as they eat
I
every
see.
last thing. Yeah, the rabbits very much fertilize my garden here.
Oh gosh. But then are they eating things or do you have
Yes.
them? Yes.
No, they're,
Yeah.
and so that's one thing that I struggle with because I mean, they naturally prune my raspberries, which is fine, but they're pruning my blackberries, which is less fine because my blackberries won't fruit on pruned canes. But because we get so much snow here, like some years, so 2 years ago, they ate the top of my cherry tree, and my cherry tree is maybe only 5 feet tall, but they got to the top of it because we had 5 feet of proper
No.
snow on the ground. And so I can't protect any of my plants from them other than putting those green domes on top. That's the best action that I have.
Yeah, yeah. That's something that is so funny. I will have gardeners like in the spring, kind of like, what happened to my, my shrubs? Like, why are they all? And I'm like, well, it looks like rabbit damage. And they're like, but rabbits are down here, and this is up there. I'm like, yeah. Remember, where was the snow? Right? Like they're up
Yeah.
there eating, Japanese maples and burning bush and things like
Yeah.
that. So yeah. So we don't think about it because we think of the ground, but we don't think about the snow, the fact that they are up on that snow and they're munching away.
And I don't know why they choose. I'm like, couldn't you find anything other than my raspberry bush or my currant tree or my cherry tree, like
Hmm.
anything but the high quality stuff?
Yeah, and you would think the thorns would do some work at
You
keeping
would
it.
think.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
does not. It does not stop them. Must have tongues of steel.
They must. They must. Those little teeth of theirs. So,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's been great talking with you, and I'm excited about your course. So, why don't you tell us? And we'll definitely have all your information in the show notes, but tell us where you would like our listeners to look for you.
So the easiest place is on my website, which is www.urbangardeningcanada.com. And for my course, there's a big yellow button that says courses. So it's the easiest way to click on it to find the course. But you can also find me on Instagram at Urban Gardening Canada and on YouTube also at Urban Gardening Canada.
Excellent. And we will have links to that all on my show notes and when we put it out in social media as well, I will collaborate with you there. And are you working on, well, now that the season's begun though, but are you working on another course? Is there like, something brewing?
Not quite yet.
Not
So
quite yet. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I
That's
was
great.
I was focusing on YouTube, and now I'm going to go focus back on getting my website, some more blogs up on there to make sure that anything someone's looking for, they can find on my website. And then hopefully I'll get back to a course in a few months coming up.
Yeah, yeah. It is kind of like a fall thing to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's good. Well, you keep us posted, and I definitely want to stay connected to you. And anytime you have something you'd love to share, I would love to have you back, and we can do it again.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for joining me down the garden path. It's always great to talk to somebody new and somebody Canadian, and I'm so excited for your endeavor. And I look forward to looking up your YouTube videos and seeing what I can learn too, and pass on to my clients.
Thanks
So
so
thank you
much.
very much for joining me here.
Yeah, thanks. It was so great chatting with you.
Excellent. So I hope everybody, please check out urbangardeningcanada.com. And thank you for joining us here. And I'm sure you're going to find and really consider the course, because I think you can watch a lot of things, but having something step by step with someone who's got the experience is just invaluable. So I think it's for all those new gardeners out there, please consider something like, Bree's course, and we will see you next week. Bye for now, everyone. And thank you for joining me down the garden path.